U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor now apologizing for publicly criticizing her colleague. We're talking about Justice Brett Kavanaugh. What was it over? Apparently a disagreement about immigration stops in Los Angeles. So let's break this down live to CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. So Katrina, this is kind of rare, not only to see a justice criticize another justice, but then to step forward on the back end and apologize. What happened?
It is extremely rare to see a Supreme Court justice, as you said, make this public, personal criticism in particular, and then now this apology from Justice Sotomayor. So the words that it's based on is she had a speaking appearance at the University of Kansas, and she had said, she was talking about a case, this is from a man whose parents were professionals and probably doesn't really know any person who works by the hour. The case that this is about is a Supreme Court decision that lifted a ban where ICE was making these stops in Los Angeles based on race, whether someone spoke Spanish, their occupation. A lower court had put a halt on that. The Supreme Court lifted it, and Justice Kavanaugh wrote a concurrence. He said that these are just brief stops. He implied that they don't really create a big impact. But Justice Sotomayor felt differently. She said that these can have real financial consequences, especially for people who are hourly workers. And she pointed to Justice Kavanaugh's upbringing. His father was a lobbyist. His mother was a prosecutor and a judge. By contrast, Justice Sotomayor grew up in the Bronx. She was mainly raised by her mother, who was a nurse, but she was just saying that his sheltered upbringing may make it so he doesn't totally understand this population. So we heard this very public criticism, now an apology. She didn't actually specifically name Justice Kavanaugh either time, but it was implied who she's talking about. And in her apology, she said, at a recent appearance at the University of Kansas School of Law, I referred to a disagreement with one of my colleagues in a prior case, but I made remarks that were inappropriate. I regret my hurtful comments. I've apologized to my colleague. So she's telling us that she, behind the scenes, has apologized to Justice Kavanaugh about this. And it's also remarkable because we're hearing quite a bit from the Supreme Court justices this week. Earlier this week, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson spoke at Yale University, and she made some fiery statements. Let's take a listen.
As one of my colleagues recently suggested in an opinion, while other litigants have to wait in line, some frequent emergency docket filers have the court on speed dial. I am very troubled by the institutional costs that the Supreme Court's current stay practices impose on the institution in terms of its relationships with the lower courts and the American people.
So we're hearing some real concern from Justice Jackson about some of the decisions that are being issued by the Supreme Court, criticism of the conservative majority faction of the Supreme Court. We also heard from Justice Clarence Thomas last night on the flip side, and he was criticizing progressivism. What he said is that it seeks to replace the basic premises of the Declaration of Independence and hence our form of government. So increasingly, it just feels like we are hearing publicly more and more about these divisions within the court. But this situation with Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kavanaugh was especially remarkable because of how personal it was.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, following that, thank you so much.